Hello everyone, welcome to the Week 8 online class. I know this week you'll be, well, most of you will be thinking about your writing unit of work. You might have an existing unit sitting there, and I'm quite happy for you to use that because the essay is where the key understandings are going to be communicated. So let's say you've got a science unit of work. My question then would be, where is the writing? What are the writing requirements in that unit of work, and how can you explicitly teach writing within an authentic context within that unit? So let's think about, or how can you also use writing to, to support students' learning, to reinforce student learning. Anyway, today we're going to be looking predominantly at narratives, and certainly narratives can help students to engage with content in fields other than English. So don't restrict yourselves, don't be flexible in your thinking, that's my point. And if you want to create a specific unit, that's excellent, that's fine. If you want to use an existing unit, then you can adjust and perhaps even problematize it in your essay to explore the effectiveness of your planning for the explicit teaching and use of writing to support student learning. So today we're going to, as I mentioned before, focus on narrative writing, and with that in mind, we'll look this time at reading, responding to, and writing narratives, and the issue of assessment and feedback and NAPLAN. So that's a lot to fit in 1 week. But if you read our set text, chapter 14 on narratives, you'll find that there are very nice, succinct explanations for much of what is being discussed today. Let me see. Next is, because this unit doesn't focus on reading, ELA 201 covers all the principles for the teaching of reading. I'll just briefly connect reading and writing. And I'll do so by making a note that it is incredibly important to promote a variety of narrative genres in your classroom, because in so doing, and of course the idea is that you organize a scope and sequence across all the year levels at your school to ensure that the broadest possible range of narrative genres, and in fact all writing genres, are covered in a meaningful way across the years that students are at the school. And the reason for this is that texts, the reading of texts and responding to narratives provides a student of an understanding of how texts work, and also they provide models for particular genres, and also provide and extend, I should say, students' vocabulary. So it's not just the genres that need to be varied, but also the topics that are covered in the texts that are read. And with regards to the reading of the text, of course you want to encourage literal readings of the text. So this encourages students to demonstrate their understanding, comprehension in other words, of the text. Literal readings, that is, what is in the text, what does the sentence mean. But also, that is a limited approach. You also need to encourage inferential readings, because most narrative texts these days are quite sophisticated and can be read at multiple levels. So it's far more rewarding when a student can infer other meanings from the text other than what is simply stated there. And by inferential readings, some examples, certainly not limited to these, are personal readings, intertextual readings, and socio-cultural readings. So if we go back to personal readings of the text, and the reason this is important again is to help students think about what kind of texts they can create. How can they create sophisticated or more complex texts? Again, this depends on the year level that you're working at, but let's say we're thinking of year 6. This is for the primary years and early childhood years now at least. It's always good to know what is the end goal and then work backwards from there. So it's kind of backwards planning. So if you find yourself teaching in grade 2, then you would want to know, well, what do grade 3 students need to know? And that end goal will give you an idea of making sure that you've got your students to that level. Irrespective of what they know at this point, you know that that's the level you want them leaving your classroom with, because that will prepare them for the next year level. So it might mean that for some students you'll have to speed up their learning of writing, accelerate, and to do that you need to differentiate your teaching for certain groups. Where you see that there is a gap in their understanding, then ideally, I know it's not a magical pill, that no matter how much you differentiate, you may find that some students will continue to struggle. But the important point is that you recognize their learning needs and that you do everything you can to support them, and maybe include a bit of research on how you can support them if they continue to struggle. So anyway, let's go back to the task at hand and think about, as a teacher, the ways you can encourage students to engage with and think about and talk about texts. So for personal readings, how does this text make you feel? And why and how does it do this? Talking about this helps students to understand how they can shape the texts that they write to engage their readers in a similar way. What kind of language is powerful, creates powerful emotions, and perhaps they can then use that kind of language in their own writing. How does this text connect to your own experiences? Often students will think, well, the experiences I have are my own, and no one else in the world feels this way. And to some degree, they are correct, because we all experience the world around us in a unique way. We're all uniquely positioned in terms of our background experiences, our attitudes, our values, and so on, and the social group that we hold in esteem, you know, and wish to be associated with, or our personal goals and so on. Nevertheless, there are elements of human experience that can promote empathy and understanding across individuals in very diverse contexts. I'm thinking of such things as fear, anxiety, stress, obligation, a sense of obligation, and how that might fight against our sense of freedom, our need for freedom and adventure. So you can see that some of these, there are many things that you can think about that all of us can relate to in some way, because life is always about balancing out our desires with our responsibilities. Personal desires versus social responsibilities and so on. Anyway, which character settings do you like, dislike, relate to, and why? And this can provide some insights into your own personalities and how that might impact on the people around you. Not just your own personality, but your own actions and the reasons behind the things you do. And perhaps you can overlay those ways of thinking and understanding onto some of the characters. And in this way, narratives provide an opportunity for experiencing perhaps dangerous or upsetting or highly controversial topics and contexts in a vicariously. So you're not in danger, but if you empathize with the character and you relate to them in some way, then you can explore the possible responses that you could, or the character could have in the situation, and then consider the implications, moral or legal implications of those responses. And again, this helps if you direct their attention to this fact. This will help students to think about the kind of creative writing that can connect other and engage and impact on other people. What kind of language use also is happening in the text, but we'll look at that in more detail later. So this is more the big picture, connecting reading and writing. So models, it's so important, therefore, that you find models of writing that enable you to teach these things. Intertextual readings. Does this text remind you of or refer to, explicitly refer to, another story? I have read a story that refers to the picture of Dorian Gray, and quite explicitly, and that had quite a profound impact on me because I had read Dorian Gray, and I could see the analogy then of what was happening in the story I was reading to this other book that I was familiar with. And so you might think about, well, what's the effect of this association? So the student might know something about Harry Potter. He might be writing a fantasy story, and a character might come through the story and his name is Harry Potter. You know, what are the implications there? What effect will that have on the reader? And these are just ideas, you know, it adds a breadth of ideas to what students can write about and why they might bring certain ideas into their narratives. And thinking about social and cultural readings of diverse texts, again, if you are constantly bringing into your reading classroom the same kind of texts, then you're limiting students' ways of thinking about how to create interesting, complex, or innovative narratives. And so when we think about social and cultural readings of texts, if you select texts that explore different cultural perspectives, different lifestyles, different social groups, and people's attempts to integrate into another cultural or social context or scenario or group, then you could start exploring ideas such as, is this fair? Why did people treat him or her or it in this way? Why did they respond in this way? So, reading and responding to narratives in a variety of ways, so reading and responding to a variety of narrative types in a variety of ways, will extend your students' creative writing skills. Not necessarily their skills, but the ways they think about and get ideas for writing. So this is a very important aspect of writing a narrative. And if you look at chapter 14 as well, you can see that Wing-Jan actually provides lots of ideas about thinking about writers and stories, about story starters, how to write a parody, how to finish a story, how to consider points of view, how to build the setting, and she's got a good concept map there that explores settings, and you can do the same thing about characters. You can do the same thing about plot. Now, I'm moving on further to look at NAPLAN, sorry, not NAPLAN, but Acara, the English curriculum. And what I have up here is simply an overview of the language, literature, and literacy strand. Wait a minute, let me just check. This one's the language strand. The next one is the literature. Oh yes, I've got it right. And the literacy strand. I've got them in the right order. Of the Acara English curriculum for Year 6. And I'm doing this just as a model for you in case you have not looked at the writing requirements of the English curriculum. You might not know, and I certainly don't know, which year level you will end up working in. But I like to work backwards, and I like to think that your skill sets are sufficient to teach Year 6 should you be required to, because that's certainly what the degree qualifies you to do. And for this reason, I've got the Year 6 curriculum outcomes, just an overview. I haven't got all the details. You can see on the right here where it's got elaborations. If you look up the elaborations, if you click on that, you'll get a more detailed account of what these learning outcomes include, because this is a broad learning outcome that may include diverse lesson learning outcomes as they relate to, in this context, WLSR. So this particular learning outcome relates to writing, it relates to listening, it relates to speaking, and it relates to reading. And for the purpose of this particular unit, of course, I'm looking at all the learning outcomes that have a W. So this one here, this one here. You'll notice this one is just for listening and speaking. So, you know, I'm just saying that you might not click on that now, but when you're looking for listening and speaking learning outcomes, then certainly you would, and they're all related. So listening to the reading of a text and talking about a narrative helps you to write a narrative. It gives you ideas for writing a narrative. So they are all relevant. And I know it's too small for you to look at, but I just wanted to remind you to have a look at the Acara document, especially the W's, to see exactly what kind of writing skills Year 6 students should have, and to reflect on your own writing skills and whether you need to do a little bit of extra reading, a few quizzes, you know, to check and test your own ability to teach those skills. And we've got language variation and change, and certainly if a student wants to write about a historical event, they might need to also consider how English might have been different at that period of time, just as an example. Or how a person might have had a particular dialect. So if, for example, they're writing about people who had just arrived in Australia during the gold rush, what kind of language, where did they come from? If it's England, if it's what kind of language, how could you express their character, their background, simply through their dialect, their dialogue that they use, that you write for the character. Because dialogue is an important way of constructing character as well. And here we've got understand the uses of objective and subjective language. Just a quick view through. And this is all related to language, the language strand. So I'll let you look at those yourselves. We've got expressing and developing ideas, and you can see W's all the way through here. Understand how ideas can be expanded and sharpened through careful choice of verbs, elaborated tenses, and a range of adverb groups and phrases. Just a few comments there. So when you're writing your unit of work, or if it's an existing unit of work, when you're critically reflecting on it, where are the opportunities to build in the explicit teaching of these writing skills? For example, make connections between students' own experiences and those of characters and events represented in texts drawn from different historical, social and cultural contexts. Analyse and evaluate similarities and differences in texts on similar topics, themes or plots. You can see that the particular genres and purposes for writing vary across these strands, but they're all relevant, and with regards to narratives, certainly the literature strand in particular. If you look at the W's there, identify, describe and discuss similarities and differences between, oh, did I just read that one? I can't remember now. Anyway, let's carry on. And finally, the literacy strand, texts in context, interact, got up here. Just looking for one. Interpreting, analyzing, evaluating. Oh yes, creating text. Here's what a good one. Plan, draft and publish imaginative, informative and persuasive texts, choosing and experimenting with text structures, language features, images and digital resources appropriate to purpose and audience. It's a very good one there. Anyway, so please do have a look at the curriculum. If you know you've got a placement in a school for Year 2 next year, this coming semester 1, then have a look at the Year 2 language literacy and literature strands and look at the writing components. Or if you're looking at a unit of work that you're going to work with for assignment 3 for this unit, then go through, as I have done, at a particular year level that your unit is planned for. Look at the literature, literacy and language strands and reflect critically on where you could possibly include explicit teaching of aspects that you see in the English curriculum. And you know, at the end here, as with all of the year levels, we've got a nice overview. So the receptive modes are listening, reading and viewing, but this is the one that we're interested here in with regards to writing. Students understand how language features and language patterns can be used for emphasis. They show how specific details can be used to support a point of view. They explain how their choices of language features and images are used. Now, if your unit of work is not appropriate for the use of narrative texts, then that's okay, because you can look at the, as you can see, this is not always about narratives. This can also be about informational, factual texts, or even information narratives, which you can read about. It's actually the topic of next week, but I think I'll throw that into the ring for this week, information narratives. So biographies and so on, that can have, it has literary features and similar structures to a narrative, but actually discusses real events. So you might find those useful in science, in maths, you know, looking at the discovery of a particular theorem, I don't know, or any other field, and then you can use that to discuss aspects of writing in your unit. Depends on your unit, of course. Okay, so remember that you also have Year 6 work sample portfolios, so you can get a feel for the standard that you might encounter at that year level. And you know, I'm not being prescriptive. I'm only using Year 6 to get you thinking about what is it students should be able to do by the end of the primary school. But of course, you can cover any particular year level that is relevant to your interests or your context, because these assignments are meant to be useful for you for your practice as well. So please do look at both chapters 14 and 15 this week if you have time. If you don't, that's fine. Have a look at the chapter that is most relevant for assignment 2. The main thing is that you're aware of some additional aspects of teaching narratives. You understand the resources that's available, the strategies in Right Way, and the resources available in the curriculum documents. Also, if I move on, resources that are available at the NAPLAN site. And here is an example of a NAPLAN test. It's fairly typical. It provides a topic, a very generic topic, which allows students to be able to relate it in some way to themselves. And if we have a look at it, it says here, the idea for your story is discovery. And I've just got this off the NAPLAN website. I think I've got that website written down, and hopefully in the next slide we'll have a look. And there's a comment here to get students thinking. We can make all sorts of discoveries. We might discover a new idea. So you can see they're doing a bit of brainstorming for the student already. A new idea, an interesting object, or a secret. Now everybody has a secret. So this is what I mean by connecting to a student's experience. So if they haven't found an interesting object or don't own one, or if they don't have a secret they wish to divulge in a subtle way that doesn't implicate any family members, then, then it would be unusual, but certainly the images may help students. Here's a rocket, so it could be, oh right, I could write science fiction, or I can write an adventure story, a travel story. You see, here's an example of an interesting object. Ah, treasure chest. So you can see all the stimulus material. In other words, to get students thinking about what they can write. And this is the kind of material that you need to think about, not just for NAPLAN, but generally for when you want students to write about a topic. What kind of material? What is the breadth of this topic? Is it sufficiently broad that students can write about very diverse things? And certainly here, there is no requirement to stick to any particular genre, narrative genre. So fairy tale, science fiction, exploration narrative, it could be a detective story. So you can see that that's one of the good things about the NAPLAN writing. It's not too prescriptive. And it does encourage the student to think about characters. Sorry, I'm trying to read it because it's a bit small. But you can go on to, my point is not that my lectures are comprehensive, certainly not. In fact, all my lectures are intended to do is to direct you in different directions to indicate the breadth of the topic that we're covering. And so here anyway, let's have a look. Who are the characters and where are they? What is the complication or problem to be addressed? How will the story end? Your story may be chosen to be published. So here we've got a brief overview of what should be in the story. It's kind of like a reminder, very helpful, of things to think about. And here are some planning tips. Remember to plan your story before you start. Write in sentences. Pay attention to the words you choose, your spelling and punctuation. Check and edit your writing when you've finished. So this reminds the student that writing is a process. There's not a lot of time, of course, but if students have been practicing all year, they should understand what this means. And if they don't understand, it means that there's either a big gap in the teaching at the school, or the student has moved from one school to another. What can you do about that? That's one of the issues that the national curriculum is intended to address. If everyone addresses curriculum at 1 year level, then if a student moves to another school, then in theory they should still be working at the correct level, and that school should have covered what the other school had. Although if a student moves mid-year, mid-semester, then the scope and sequencing of learning outcomes differs across various schools. So there's still going to be some issues experienced by the students and teachers. Now, with a note on assessment and feedback, I'm not sure whether I've covered the use of writer's notebook, but there are many, many approaches to the creation and maintenance of writer's notebooks in the classroom. And one of the good things about the writer's notebook is that students record all their ideas great ideas for writing in various genres on various topics. So please do put in Writer's Notebook into Google, do a Google search, and find, just get a feel for the different kinds of Writer's Notebook that are out there, and you can then decide what's suitable for your classroom. It always needs to be adjusted. Any assessment, teaching and learning strategy or assessment task needs to be adjusted to fit your teaching and learning activities and the kind of texts that you're using. Always has to be fit for purpose. Similarly, look up writing portfolios and assessment portfolios. These portfolios differ in terms of who they're actually for. In some cases, portfolios are for the students. It's to record what they've done through the year, to record their reflections. In other cases, the student portfolios are for teachers or parents even. So more detail needs to be provided. Again, please do look up portfolios to see the range available. I think Wingjan might mention, I'm just going to look in the back to see in the index to see if there's anything on writing portfolios. OP, LMNO, portfolio assessment and self-assessment on page 99 and 109. It's only very briefly covered, but there is actually a great deal that goes into portfolios. I'm not sure if I'll have time to teach it, but I do have time to point out that as an assessment tool, these portfolios can promote reflection in students. Students can review other students' portfolios, or they can, at the end of the year, review their own, and they can be brought to writing conferences with colleagues, so with their peers, or with the teacher. So, at writing conferences, you might say have a writing conference with 2 or 3 students once a week, or you might have a weekly writing conference so that you cover all students across the term. It's entirely up to you. The content could be on one particular text type, such as narrative, or it can look at a portfolio of text types. It can also look at the writer's notebook, and it can be teacher-led, or it can be student-led. Some things to think about in terms of your pedagogical approach to these writing strategies. And author's chair, of course, is a great way to provide an authentic audience for students' writing. If students know that they get to share their writing, they're more likely to put greater effort into it. They're more likely to give feedback and use ideas from feedback in the future for their writing. I think I mentioned author's chair early this semester, so please do look it up on the internet. Also look up videos, because you'll see some great videos for writer's notebook, use of writing portfolios, writing conferences, and author's chair. And moving on to NAPLAN criteria, if you read Wingjan, you'll see that there is quite a bit of overlap between the topics covered in Chapter 14 and the marking criteria for NAPLAN, because Wingjan does address the Australian context as well. So if we have a look at Chapter 14, we can see that on page 269, she discusses one of the teaching focuses for narratives, which is purpose and audience. And purpose, of course, relating to text genre, and audience relating to the text register. Again, these words have been explained numerous times, so I hope you feel comfortable talking, writing about, reflecting critically on this in your assignment if you wish to, or need to, or feel it's relevant. Text structure is also covered in Chapter 14 on page 270, very, very briefly, but I think what is good about being concise is that you don't get overly stressed about how do I discuss text structure. Instead, if you want to know more about text structure, you can go to the NAPLAN site, and it gives you far more detailed descriptors for how to grade text structure students' development of the narrative text structure. Oh, and here we go. Look, I have given you the website, the URL. So these are the criteria, just like my rubric. On one side you'll see criteria and you've got a broad overview here. But if you go to this particular website, this is part of a very long document, not too long, quite accessible really, and each of these criteria, each criterion can be then divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and you can see how these descriptors help you to identify the level of the student's ability to orient, engage, and affect the reader, or their ability to organize narrative features, and so on. So this is just an overview. Please do go to this website, download the PDF that explains the marking criteria for narrative writing. And so you can see here ideas. We've covered how to do ideas. You've seen the NAPLAN writing stimulus, and I think I have already discussed mapping, providing mind maps, doing brainstorming, perhaps reading a text, asking questions and having a discussion before asking students to write a narrative that explores that situation or explores that character, that kind of character, and how they might react in a particular context. And that leads us to character and setting, which Wing Jan discusses on page 270 and 271. Vocabulary. I'd like to add, before I move on, that going back to character and setting, on page 273, you've got a section on dialogue. Now that's really important, and if you put teaching dialogue or anything like that into a Google search, you'll find lots of great ideas for teaching dialogue, but also Wing Jan recommends conduct a reader's theatre activity to help students identify and use dialogue. Another way of going about it is if all the students are writing on around a similar text, exploring how students might respond to a particular situation, you could use what is known as the fishbowl activity or hot seat activity, where a person takes on the role of a particular character while other students interview that character, and the rest of the class sit around the interviewer and the interviewee and think about what's going on, what kind of answers and questions are provided, and that can inspire them to write on that topic. Vocabulary, again, speaking, discussing, all enables you to extend students' vocabulary or to remind students of useful vocabulary for the topic. Chapter 2 is very useful, not just for vocabulary, but also for considering cohesion, cohesive devices, and the kind of devices that can be used, conjunctions and so on, cause and effect type language to create relationships across the text, to tie ideas together. actually sometimes it's good, especially if it's a suspense building exercise. Some of the cohesive aspects of the text are challenged. Some of the links between ideas are broken. And, you know, this is part of narrative technique, is to create a tension. And that's in part one of the complications that occur. So, you know, you must think flexibly. One of the dangers of teaching this kind of structure and approach to narrative writing is that all the texts turn out to be kind of Mills and Boonish in their sort of almost writing to a recipe. And the best texts are those that have unexpected twists and turns. And it's very important as teachers that you don't discourage students for being creative, but you ask them, why did you do that? And then if they give you a really good reason, then hey, it doesn't comply with NAPLAN expectations, but it actually demonstrates extremely good creative writing skills. So please do think outside the box and encourage your students to do that too. There are times for that, and there are times for the more prescriptive approach, and this needs to be discussed quite clearly and explicitly with your students so you don't confuse them, that they don't feel like, oh, you told me to write like this, and then you say, well, this isn't very creative, or you tell me to be creative and then you don't understand what is actually happening in the text because you're applying this really prescriptive framework to the way you read my text. So that's the danger, is that we create people who read narratives in a particular way and don't like anything that doesn't align with their expectation of what narrative should include, such as a clear ending. I prefer narratives that don't have a clear ending. That's very much a postmodern approach to narrative writing, because life doesn't always have tidy endings. These are some of the discussions that can be useful when you talk about preparing for NAPLAN. Yes, so anyway, as you can see, I think NAPLAN is useful. It helps to guide your teaching, but at the same time, it's dangerous if you think this is what narrative writing is. It's actually quite an arbitrary set of rules that build on Western literary success rather than different cultural understandings of the functions, purposes, and genres of narrative writing. Anyway, let me just finish that now. I think I've problematized narrative writing while at the same time pointing you to very important resources that ensure that when you go into a school, you can demonstrate your understanding of what institutional expectations of narrative writing are. And of course, as always, Wingjan has some wonderful ideas about engaging students, you know, making writing fun, not all about testing. So that's it for me for now. I look forward to catching up with you in week 9. Bye for now, and thanks for listening.